Hello and welcome to this special edition of The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. This month of May has a special place in history. 69 years ago, mankind has first set foot on the peak of the world's highest mountain, Mount Qomolangma, also known as the Mount Everest. Now, this May, there are more awe-inspiring achievements. A climbing legend who stood on the peak of the mountain an incredible 16 times shares his story with me here on The Hub. We also look at how China is reclaiming its place on the mountain, making it a beacon for biodiversity protection.
69 years ago, on May 29th, a new chapter began in the history of adventure and exploration. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzin Norgay Sherpa stood on the top of Mount Qomolangma, the highest mountain in the world, for the first time in history. Since then, the peak, also known as Mount Everest, has been ascended more than 10,000 times. Over 300 people died in the attempt. But despite the charisma of the peak, it remains a towering example of cultural appropriation and neglect of the native hero. Mount Qomolangma stands on the border between China and Nepal. However, few remember the first Chinese and Nepali mountaineers who also submitted it against greater odds. May 25, 1960. On this day, 3 Chinese conquered the peak from the northern side, which till then was regarded as unscalable. The 3 mountaineers were Wang Fuzhou, a 25-year-old geologist from Beijing; Gong Bu, a 27-year-old member of the People's Liberation Army; and Qu Yinghua, a 25-year-old lumberjack. The historic Chinese mountaineering expedition to Mount Everest consisted of 214 people, including workers, farmers, newly freed serfs, scientific researchers, and medical workers. A member of the expedition, Shi Zhanchun, wrote an account of that achievement in the Alpine Journal in 1961. The final assault on the summit of the world's highest peak had taken them a total of 19 hours, during which they had not a mouthful of food or water, except a piece of dried mutton and some ginseng soup which they ate as breakfast before leaving the assault camp. Most people know of Japan's Junko Tabe as the first woman to reach the peak in 1975. However, few know that Fan Tok, also known as Pan Duo, was the first Chinese woman to do so. In fact, like the Chinese man who pioneered the northern route, she was the first woman to do so. She reached the summit just 11 days after Tabe, on May 27th. However, with the rise in the Chinese economic development, the old historic wrongs are now being righted. China's place in Mount Qomolangma's history was underlined this month when 13 members of a Chinese scientific research team reached the summit on May 4th. They were carrying out China's second scientific survey on the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau and measured the thickness of ice and snow on the top. It's also a matter of national pride that China and Nepal have both undertaken independent surveys to estimate the exact height of Mount Qomolangma. And in a sign of bilateral diplomacy 2 years ago, they agreed that the peak's official height was 8,848.86 meters. Last but not least, Chinese researchers have established 8 weather stations on the mountain to collect data to understand climate change and ensure better biodiversity preservation. The highest one is in the death zone at 8,800 meters. Mount Qomolangma is not just for sports, it's our mentor to sustainable development.
Now let's start with Kenton Cool, British mountaineer who's just back after his 16th Everest summit. He joins us from Gloucestershire, the UK. Kenton, great to see you. Great to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be with you this morning.
You know what? I meant to say congratulations, but I think it's an understatement for someone who has climbed, who have stood on the top of the mountain, the top of the world for 16 times over. And the latest endeavor was what, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, 2 weeks yesterday. No, 2 weeks tomorrow, May the 15th. We were there for about 4:30 in the morning, just as the sun broke over the sort of Chinese border. So as we climb up, China is on our right-hand side, and that's where the sun comes up. And we had the most amazing sunrise, probably one of the best I've ever seen.
How long did it take for you to go up to the mountain this time around?
So this expedition was just over 4 weeks long. I arrived in Kathmandu, I think April 15. So it was almost 4 weeks to the day from arriving to standing on the top. And then my client, because I'm a professional mountain guide, my client turned up. She arrived April 17. So the trip for her, she came from the US. The trip for her was even shorter. So I've got to say congratulations to Rebecca Louise for being such an amazing client with me.
What stages of the climbing would you say was the hardest among others when it comes to testing your stamina, challenging you physically?
I think that on the south side, at least on the Nepalese side, there's two spots. One is coming through the icefall. So we have this cascade of ice.
How high is it?
So you go from base camp to camp one. So it's about 700 meters. And it's a cascade of ice that comes down, a glacier with lots of crevasses. And you might see the pictures of climbers going across ladders. It's pretty unique to Everest. There's nothing else like it in the world. One of the reasons why a lot of people prefer to climb from China is because there's no icefall. The icefall is notoriously dangerous. It's beautiful, but it is dangerous. And it takes quite a long time to navigate through. It takes 6 to 8 hours to go through. So the climbers are exposed to that danger the whole time. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is summit day, when you leave the top camp to go to the top. And the difference with the icefall and summit day is the icefall is comparatively low on the mountain, whereas summit day is obviously up the top, and you're dealing with what's known as the death zone, that area of atmosphere where human beings just are not supposed to live. So that's an added element of danger. And for me as a mountain guide, those 2 days are the most stressful. They are the days that I'm most worried about.
One question many would want to ask you, that I'm asking on their behalf, I guess, is what kind of food do you pack to keep you going, basically?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. At base camp, the food is normally very good. We have cooks and we have cook assistants, and the food is amazing. On the mountain, it's got to be lightweight. It's got to have lots of calories, and it's got to be easy to cook. So a lot of the food is boiled in the bag. So they come in bags, perhaps dehydrated, or food that can be very easily heated up. I often take noodles because noodles take no time at all to cook. They're super lightweight. They've got calories in there because we only spend 3 or 4 days at a time sort of climbing up and coming back down. So you can have a number of food substances which are lightweight, easy to carry, easy to cook, quick to cook, and easy to digest. And then I supplement it with things like, the packets of goo, it's like a rice syrup quite often. They're like a squidgy, high energy gel, which we use. So I supplement it with gels and things like that. So when I'm actually climbing, I'll eat the gels. When I'm in the tent and when I'm in the camps, I will quite often eat noodles, and then porridge for the morning as well. Again, very quick, easy to do, high calories, slow burn.
And then Kenton, what was the closest you've ever gotten to giving up?
I don't think I've ever really thought about giving up on Everest. If you see Everest, if you travel to, I think it's Tingri is the nearest village to Everest, certainly on the north side, and you can travel to base camp by road. And if you see the mountain, then you will realize why giving up on the mountain is not really an option. She is such a magnificent looking mountain that all you want to do is climb it. And it really stirs something inside you to make you try that little bit harder. I suppose if I was going to say that I nearly gave up once, I think it was 2006, long time ago. I got hit on the head by a rock on summit day. I ended up with 7 stitches in my head. My skull was opened up, blood. But even then, I felt this desire to try to push forwards and to get to the top, which I successfully did and got back down again, much to the distress of the team doctor who thought I was mad. I think that's probably the closest I've come to turning around. But the allure of certainly Mount Everest is something very special. And if you see her, then being a climber yourself, I have no doubt there will be a desire to try to get to the top.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the dangers that you've faced. You've had a 14-feet fall from a rock in 1996, which shattered both your heel bones, and doctors said you would never climb again. And yet there you are, achieving the highest summit 16 times over. What was it like? Tell us about it.
Well, I remember that fall quite vividly. I was meant to be going to Pakistan on an expedition. Only a few days later, I broke a hold. So when you're rock climbing, sometimes the rock's not quite so stable, and I broke a hold. I hit the floor, and I spent about 4 weeks in hospital, 3 different operations. I was in a wheelchair for about 4 months, and it was very, very tough to be told that my passion of climbing was no longer possible. I think these obstacles which are put in our path, whatever it may be, they're merely problems to be solved. And I think if we are passionate about what we do, and if we're determined that we want to succeed, we will always find solutions to our problems. And I think that's what I did. I found different ways of climbing, different ways of using my feet, because even today, my ankles don't bend properly. They don't flex that way very well. So certain types of rock climbing are very, very hard for me, even today. But I just find different ways to adapt. And I look back on 1996, and there were some dark, dark times there. But I think that's important. We got to push ourselves as human beings to realize where our limitations are and what we can push through. And actually now I look back on those times, and I think it was formative. And I think it gave me the strength to do some of the things that I do today.
All my respect, man. All my respect. Also, talk to us about these evolving technologies and technological gadgets in perhaps helping you with your endeavors over the decades.
The really big, significant changes are one is the oxygen delivery systems. So the oxygen tanks that we carry as climbers and the masks that we wear, they've got a lot better. They've got a lot more efficient. So in the past, it used to be the Russian Poisk system, which was relatively inefficient. It didn't work very well. Whereas now there's 2 or 3 much more modern systems on the market. The oxygen cylinders have got lighter. So that's a big plus. And then the other really big bonus is communication and weather forecasting. So at base camp now, there's actually Wi-Fi, which sounds ridiculous that I can connect with my phone and get my phone to connect to the roof of the world. But it means that we can get information. And that big one is the weather. And it was interesting this year that the Chinese put a weather station high on Everest. And then Nat Geo put another weather station on the Nepal side. So we now have these weather stations high on Everest that can give us real-time information.
And also, I'm interested in your take on climate change, an issue that is affecting all of us. You've been to the highest mountain of the world. How have you observed the evolving geographical and climate landscapes?
So unfortunately, it's changing, and it's changing for the worse quite rapidly. And I can give you 2 very good examples just from this year. So the south col of Everest, which is our highest camp on the Nepalese side, is 8,000 meters above sea level. And this year, for the first time ever, I saw sort of standing water, so non-frozen water at the South Pole. Normally it's a frozen wasteland, whereas this year there was actually puddles of water during the day because it was heating up so much. And that's a concern. If it's not freezing at 8,000 meters during the day, that's a big concern. And then as we were coming down, we came down off the summit, came past Camp 4, past Camp 3, and we ended up on the top, on the top section of the Western Cone, this amazing hidden valley. And there were deep rivulets, maybe 6, 7, 8 inches deep of water running down the glacier. And I've never seen that. In all the years I've been on Everest, I've never seen that amount of running water. And that can only be attributed to higher temperatures. And I see it with my very eyes, not just in the Himalayas, but I see it in the Alps, I see it in the Andes. I even see it on the tropical glaciers in places like Kilimanjaro and on Carsten's Pyramid. These glaciers are retreating at a frightening rate. And once they've gone, it's going to take another ice age to bring them back. And I'm really concerned about what's happening. It's a big, big problem.
Mountaineer is one of the riskiest jobs ever in the world. If you had the chance to choose all over again, would you choose to be a mountaineer?
100%, without a shadow of a doubt. If you step into the mountains, wherever it may be, the sense of freedom it gives you, the sense of humility, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. I would not change one part of my career at all, given a second choice. I love what I do.
You've been watching The Hub. We now have veteran Nepali journalist Kunda Dixit, editor of Nepali Times, joining us from Abu Dhabi, the UAE. And also with us is Li Nan, managing editor at the planning department of CICG Americas in Beijing, China. They will look at the Himalayan imbalance in Everest coverage. Stay tuned. Mr. Dixit, let me start with you. You have a ringside view of Mount Everest and the expeditions to it. Since you used to be based, you're most of the time based in Kathmandu, Nepal. What is your most special Everest memory?
Well, Everest has gone through quite a lot of turmoil. If you remember back in 2014, there was a large avalanche that killed 18 people on the ice fall. Yeah. 2015 was the earthquake in Nepal, which triggered another avalanche and killed 17 people, again at base camp. So these crises have really had a setback on mountaineering expeditions on Everest. And things was just starting to pick up when the pandemic happened. So the mountains have been closed for the past 2 years, just starting to open now. And this spring has been quite almost back to normal.
All right, Li Nan, let me turn to you. What is your most special memory, especially as you also covered the Tibet Autonomous Region in China, the northern gateway to the mountain?
Yeah, and I first went to Tibet Autonomous Region in 2017, and I plan to visit the Qomolangma base camp in 2020, but to interview villagers working there. But we couldn't do it because of the high altitude sickness. Mm-hmm. So it was like a gift when I met Xia Boyu, the Chinese double amputee who climbed Mount Qomolangma in 2018. He made it after 5 attempts. So that encouraged me to visit the base camp in the future.
You interviewed Dechang Ngoguru, the leader of the Chinese team that climbed up Mount Qomolangma, Mount Everest, this time around. The interview took place on May the 4th, right? How did he feel about the summit? What did he tell you about the trip? How was it different from, his previous endeavors?
Dechang Ngoguru has submitted Mount Qomolangma 5 times. And he told me that the latest climb on May 4 is the most significant because it was not an adventure, but an expedition to the future of the Earth. And his team set up the world's highest meteorological station at 8,830 meters. So it was a super difficult task because the climbers have to carry 15 kilograms of equipment. That's twice the usual weight carried by mountaineers. But they made it. They set up station and successfully tested data transmission. This data will help provide information on force of the winds and other natural phenomena. The north slope of Mount Qomolangma faced very strong winds. Before the stations were set up, no one knew exactly how strong the wind was. Now all the wind speeds can be measured accurately. That's very meaningful for the scientific research.
Quite an achievement in more ways than one. Mr. Dixit, I want to ask you about some Nepali climbers. Kami Rita Sherpa, if I got
That's right.
this person's name right. He climbed the world's tallest mountain, the record 26 times, but we don't often hear about stories like this in Western media. What is the reason for that? Do you think, climbers from Nepal, from other countries get the same limelight as those Western mountaineers?
No, I think a lot of people, including Westerners, realize how important Nepali guides as well as Sherpas are on the mountains. Climbing Qomolangma would be impossible without Sherpas putting up the fixed ropes, carrying the oxygen up, and basically guiding climbers from around the world to the top. Kami has been guiding Westerners to the top for, as you said, 26 times. So I think finally they're starting to get credit for it. And also many Nepali-owned companies are now doing what Western expeditions were doing, which is they themselves organize expeditions rather than them working for a Western company. So things are changing quite rapidly on the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, Li Nan, if you look at Qomolangma-related media, it's dominated by the United States. One of the best-known Qomolangma books is called Into Thin Air by American climber John Krakauer. China also made a number of initiatives of its own recently. How can China close this gap of awareness, understanding when it comes to, conquering the mountain or making an endeavor towards it, Li Nan?
I think we need to make more films on China's engagement in Qomolangma history. For example, there are 2 Chinese documentaries in these 2 years. One is To the Summit, which is on Xiaoboyu's 5 attempts to climb the mountain. The other is Captain Qomolangma, about other Chinese mountaineers summits. They are good windows for the world to know more about China's efforts to protect the mountain.
Right, Mr. Dixit, climate change is definitely on the mind of many. It's on the mind of the mountaineers themselves, I suppose. How have you observed, how have you heard about the climate change, the impact of it on those mountaineers and the efforts to really mitigate the impacts of climate change?
Well, I think it's having a huge impact on the mountain. Mountaineers who have come back from the summit have talked about how there is now less snow, less ice on the South Col as well as on the Southeast Ridge. At the base camp of the mountain, where in 1953, Hillary and Tenzing camped before they climbed the mountain for the first time. Base camp is now 50 meters below where it was in 1953 because the glacier there has shrunk and so the ice has melted away. This year, for the first time, we've seen an amazing sight, which is at base camp, there's actually a river flowing through it, which means all the surrounding ice has melted. Now, there's very little we can do immediately to change this. I think it's a global phenomenon. Global warming is happening all around the world. The Himalaya is melting twice as fast as the global average. So there's no other way but to reduce carbon emissions globally with all the world's governments coming together. But there is something we can do regionally within our own countries, which is that scientists have found that 20% of the melting is due to the deposition of soot and dust particles on the snow, which makes it melt faster. So if we can control pollution, it can actually reduce the impact of glacial melting. And as you know, the Himalaya melting does not just affect China and Nepal, it affects 1.2 billion people around the world. The Qinghai, Tibet Plateau, Himalaya, Karakoram, they are called the third pole because they are the third largest deposit of fresh water stored as ice on the planet's surface. So it's extremely important to protect the ice and snow for fresh water.
Indeed, exactly. I would second that. Li Nan, what has China been doing to reduce the impact of climate change?
China has conducted two scientific research projects on the plateau, and the Qinghai Tibet Plateau is known as the Asia's water tower. However, according to a report released by the WMO, the volumes of water in this region is expected to peak between 2030 and 2050. After that, glaciers runoff is projected to decline globally. If that happened, it would affect 1.7 billion people. Therefore, any changes on the plateau are critical for the rest of the world. So the research from China expedition will help to plan sustainable development of the region. So now there is a focus on studying glacier. Chinese scientists measure the surfaces of the East Rongbu Glacier with 3D laser scanning technology and collect ice and snow samples. This will help to assess how effective environmental protection measures have been.
All right, we're running out of time, but any final thoughts on mountaineering and helping protect biodiversity in those areas? Mr. Dixit, let me start with you.
Well, I think one way is ecotourism. And I think tourism has suffered due to the pandemic, but it's rebounding. And as you were saying about the two Chinese documentaries, which has actually revived interest on Qomolangma and the Himalaya. Similarly, there's been a Netflix documentary on a Nepali climber, Nims Purja, who has climbed 14 of the highest peaks in record time. And that Netflix film has actually done more to project and promote the Himalayas. So with tourism, you'll have income for local people. And with that, we can preserve the biodiversity of the Sagarmatha National Park.
Li Nan, what do you think?
I think tourism is really important for the plateau because to develop tourism, more people will come and the income of the local people will increase and they will have more money to protect the local environment and the local culture.
That will be indeed a virtuous cycle. Thank you so much for your insight, Mr. Dixit, Kunda Dixit in Nepal, and Li Nan here in Beijing, China. Thank you both so very much. That's all we have for this edition of The Hub. What you think matters. Send us a message on Weibo, Douyin, or your favorite social media platform. Let us know what you think. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you again soon.